The day a billionaire was finally told no was the day his real life began. The ballroom glittered beneath 1,000 crystal lights, each one reflecting off polished marble floors and champagne glasses worth more than most people's monthly rent. Conversations drifted through the air like carefully rehearsed performances. Investors laughed. Politicians smiled. Cameras flashed. It was the kind of charity gala where power dressed itself in elegance, and everyone pretended not to notice. Ethan Crawford stood at the center of it all. At 39, he was the face of success, the billionaire founder of one of America's fastest-growing technology companies. Every magazine wanted his opinion. Every investor wanted his attention. Every room seemed to tilt slightly in his direction the moment he entered it. And tonight was no different. A custom-tailored black tuxedo fit him perfectly. A Swiss watch rested beneath his cuff. Confidence followed him like a shadow. Yet his attention remained fixed on one person standing near the edge of the ballroom. Charlotte Bennett. Most people in the room barely noticed her. She wasn't a celebrity. She wasn't a donor. She wasn't even a guest. She worked for the catering company serving the event. Her dark blonde hair was neatly tied back. Her uniform was simple. Her movements were quiet and efficient as she carried trays between tables. But unlike everyone else in the room, Charlotte never looked impressed by Ethan Crawford. She never lingered when serving his table, never smiled a little wider because of his name, never treated him like the most important man in the building. And somehow, that fascinated him. For 3 months, Ethan had found reasons to attend events where her company worked. 3 months of brief conversations, small observations, unexpected curiosity. His friends called it a challenge. Ethan called it interest. Tonight, he intended to end the game. The orchestra softened. Conversations slowed. Ethan stepped onto the stage. A microphone waited in his hand. Several hundred guests turned toward him immediately. Cameras adjusted. Screens illuminated. He delivered the expected speech. Gratitude. Philanthropy. Opportunity. The audience applauded exactly when they were supposed to. Then he smiled. "Before tonight ends," he said, "there's something personal I'd like to do." A murmur rolled across the ballroom. Ethan stepped down from the stage. Every eye followed him. Charlotte had just placed a coffee cup onto a nearby table when she noticed him approaching. The room seemed to hold its breath. Ethan stopped directly in front of her. Someone gasped. Several phones rose into the air. His expression remained calm, certain, like a man who had never doubted an outcome in his life. "Charlotte Bennett," he said warmly, "you are the most genuine person I've met in years." The crowd watched in complete silence. Ethan reached into his pocket and revealed a small velvet box. The room exploded with whispers. Charlotte froze. Not from excitement, not from surprise, but from disbelief. Ethan opened the box. Inside rested a diamond ring that caught the light like frozen fire. "I know this is unexpected," he continued, "but I believe some people are worth taking a risk for." Every camera focused on Charlotte. Every conversation disappeared. Ethan smiled confidently. "Will you marry me?" Silence. A long silence. Then Charlotte looked at the ring. She looked at Ethan. Finally, she looked around the room, filled with people waiting for her answer. When she spoke, her voice was calm enough to cut through the entire ballroom. "No." The silence that followed felt even louder than before. Ethan blinked. The smile remained on his face for half a second before uncertainty slipped through the cracks. Charlotte handed him the velvet box. "You don't know me," she said softly. "And you think a grand gesture can replace that?" Ethan stared at her. The billionaire who could buy almost anything suddenly found himself standing empty-handed in front of hundreds of witnesses. Charlotte offered a polite smile. Then she picked up her tray and walked away, leaving behind a room full of stunned faces. And a man who, for the first time in his life, had absolutely no idea what to say. The headlines appeared before sunrise. By noon, clips from the gala had spread across social media. Commentators debated. Bloggers speculated. Strangers formed opinions about a woman they had never met. Yet none of them knew Charlotte Bennett. While the internet argued, Charlotte stood behind the counter of a small neighborhood cafe on the west side of Manhattan, tying on a faded apron and preparing for another 12-hour shift. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air. Cups clinked. The morning rush arrived exactly on schedule. To most customers, she was simply the woman who remembered their orders and greeted them with a quiet smile. That was how Charlotte preferred it. Attention had never interested her. Stability did. The rent for her small apartment was due every month, whether people recognized her name or not. Medical bills still arrived in thick envelopes. Groceries still had to be purchased. Life continued. At 28, Charlotte had learned that reality cared very little about public opinion. She moved efficiently between tables, balancing plates and coffee mugs with practiced ease. Outside, spring rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, familiar faces filled familiar seats. An elderly man spent every morning reading newspapers near the front door. A schoolteacher graded papers during lunch breaks. A construction foreman ordered the same turkey sandwich 3 times a week. Charlotte knew all of them, not because she had to, because she paid attention. Years earlier, her life had looked very different. She had earned a scholarship to one of the best universities in the state. Professors praised her work. Employers competed for interns with her grades. Her future seemed carefully mapped out. Then everything changed with a single phone call. Her mother had become seriously ill. Hospital visits replaced networking events. Medical appointments replaced interviews. Savings disappeared faster than anyone expected. Charlotte left school before graduation. Not because she lacked talent, because someone had to be there. Friends called it a sacrifice. Charlotte never did. To her, it was simply a choice. Family first. Everything else later. The later never came. Years passed. Opportunities faded. Yet she never complained. She worked. She helped her mother. She paid bills. She moved forward one day at a time. That was why the events at the gala bothered her more than people realized. It was not the attention. It was the assumption hidden beneath it. The assumption that a wealthy man could step into her life and skip every chapter in between. That admiration could replace understanding. That grand gestures could substitute for time. Around 3 o'clock, her phone vibrated inside her apron pocket. A text message appeared from her closest friend, Megan. "Are you okay?" Charlotte smiled faintly. The question had arrived 6 times already that day. She typed a simple response. "I am fine." "Really?" Another message appeared immediately. "The entire country is talking about you." Charlotte looked around the cafe. An exhausted nurse collected her coffee. 2 college students laughed over textbooks. Rain continued falling outside. She slipped the phone back into her pocket. The country might be talking about her, but the people who actually mattered were simply trying to get through another day. And so was she. What Charlotte did not know was that less than 2 miles away, inside a glass office tower overlooking the Hudson River, Ethan Crawford was staring at a photograph from the gala. Not because he was angry, not because he was embarrassed, but because for the first time in years, someone had shown him a version of himself he could not ignore. For 3 days, Ethan Crawford canceled every non-essential meeting. His executive team noticed immediately. Investors noticed by the end of the week. The man who normally measured time in 15-minute increments spent entire afternoons staring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office overlooking the Hudson River. The photograph from the gala remained on his desk. Not the moment before, not the moment after. The exact moment Charlotte Bennett handed the velvet box back to him. Most people assumed his silence came from humiliation. They were wrong. Ethan had experienced public criticism before. Competitors attacked him regularly. Journalists questioned his decisions. Markets rose and fell. None of that lingered. This was different. Charlotte had not rejected his wealth. She had rejected the idea behind it. The belief that success could accelerate trust. The belief that intention mattered more than understanding. Late Friday afternoon, Ethan finally spoke about it. His longtime friend Marcus sat across from him in the office, sipping coffee from a paper cup. "You are still thinking about her," Marcus said. Ethan did not deny it. "She said I do not know her." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Because you do not." Ethan leaned back. "I know enough. You know what everyone knows. That is not the same thing." The words landed harder than Marcus intended. Silence settled between them. Beyond the glass walls, Manhattan moved through another busy afternoon. Ferries crossed the river. Traffic crawled through crowded streets. Life continued. Ethan glanced again at the photograph. "Then how do I prove her wrong?" Marcus laughed softly. "That is your problem right there." "What? You still think this is about proving something?" Ethan frowned. Marcus stood and walked toward the window. "You built companies by solving problems. Every obstacle had a strategy. Every challenge had a solution. Every competitor had a weakness. But people are not businesses, Ethan." The billionaire looked away. Deep down, he knew his friend was right. Yet the feeling remained. Not anger. Not resentment. Something quieter. more uncomfortable. For the first time in years, Ethan realized how few people in his life challenged him honestly. Employees agreed with him. Investors needed him. Reporters wanted access. Even friends often softened difficult truths. Charlotte had done the opposite. She had looked directly at him and spoken without fear. That night, unable to focus on work, Ethan left the office shortly before midnight. Rain drifted through the city in a fine silver mist. He walked several blocks without security, something he rarely did. The streets felt different when no one recognized him. A delivery driver hurried past carrying dinner orders. A janitor waited for a bus beneath a flickering streetlight. A young couple shared an umbrella while laughing about something only they understood. Ethan watched quietly. Ordinary lives. Ordinary moments. None of them cared who owned the tallest building or appeared on financial magazine covers. They were simply living. The realization followed him all the way home. Meanwhile, across the city, Charlotte sat beside her mother in a modest apartment illuminated by a single lamp. A half-finished crossword puzzle rested on the coffee table. The evening news played softly in the background. Her mother looked up from her knitting. "You seem distracted." Charlotte smiled. "Just tired." Her mother studied her for a moment. "It is him, is it not?" Charlotte looked toward the rain-covered window. For the first time since the gala, she did not answer immediately. And somewhere in that silence, both of their lives began moving toward a challenge neither of them could yet see. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and an unexpected sense of determination. Ethan stood inside his penthouse kitchen, holding a cup of coffee he barely tasted. Charlotte's words continued echoing through his mind. "You do not know me." Simple words. Honest words. Yet they had unsettled him more than any business crisis ever had. By 8 o'clock, he had already made a decision. If she believed he did not understand ordinary life, then he would prove he could. Not to her. At least that was what he told himself. To himself. To everyone. The first step seemed easy enough. Ethan instructed his assistant to clear his calendar for one full day. No private drivers. No executive team. No priority access. No introductions. Just 24 hours navigating the city like everyone else. His assistant stared at him as though he had announced plans to move to the moon. "Are you serious?" she asked. Completely. By 9 o'clock, he was standing on a crowded subway platform for the first time in years. The train arrived packed with commuters. People hurried inside without recognizing him. No one stepped aside. No one offered special treatment. Ethan found himself squeezed between a college student carrying a backpack and an accountant reviewing spreadsheets on a tablet. The train rattled beneath Manhattan. Conversations overlapped. Notifications chimed. Nobody cared who he was. At first, he found the experience almost refreshing. Then reality arrived. A delayed train made him miss a scheduled appointment. A coffee shop accidentally misplaced his order. A cashier asked him to wait in line behind 12 other customers. Small inconveniences. Ordinary inconveniences. Yet by noon, frustration had begun creeping into his thoughts. He caught himself reaching for solutions that money normally provided. Then stopping. That evening he walked nearly 3 miles through neighborhoods he had only ever viewed through car windows. He noticed details he had forgotten existed. Elderly neighbors helping each other carry groceries. Small business owners sweeping sidewalks before closing. Parents pushing strollers while balancing grocery bags. Lives filled with responsibilities that never appeared on financial reports. Back at the cafe, Charlotte was finishing her shift when Megan arrived carrying 2 iced coffees. "You look exhausted," Megan said. Charlotte laughed softly. "Long day." Megan studied her carefully. "You know he has been all over the news again." Charlotte shook her head. "I have not been paying attention. Apparently he disappeared from public events all week." Charlotte focused on stacking clean cups behind the counter. That is his business. Yet something about the comment lingered. Because despite everything, she had been thinking about him too. Not often, not constantly, but enough. Enough to wonder whether the confident man from the gala existed beneath the headlines. Enough to question whether she had seen the entire picture. Meanwhile, across the city, Ethan finally returned home shortly after sunset. His expensive shoes felt uncomfortable. His shoulders ached. His phone displayed hundreds of unread messages. He dropped into a chair overlooking the skyline and released a slow breath. The challenge Charlotte had unknowingly given him suddenly felt much larger than he expected. For the first time, He began suspecting that understanding another person's life required far more than curiosity. It required humility. And humility, Ethan Crawford realized, was a skill he had never truly learned. The experiment that Ethan had expected to last a day quietly stretched into weeks. At first, he treated it like a challenge. Something measurable. Something he could master. But life refused to fit neatly inside a spreadsheet. 2 weeks after his subway experience, he found himself standing inside a community center in Brooklyn on a rainy Saturday morning. The building was old but well cared for. Volunteers moved folding tables into place while families gathered for a neighborhood food drive. Ethan wore plain jeans, a gray sweatshirt, and a baseball cap. Nobody recognized him. Nobody cared. An older volunteer handed him a box filled with canned goods. "You are late," she said. Ethan blinked. "Excuse me. You were supposed to be here at 8. "It is 8:15. The woman pointed toward a stack of unopened boxes. "Less talking, more carrying." For a moment, the billionaire almost laughed. Then he picked up the box and got to work. Hour after hour passed. He carried supplies, organized shelves, cleaned tables, helped elderly residents load groceries into their cars. By early afternoon, his back ached and his hands felt sore. Yet something unexpected happened. For the first time in years, nobody wanted anything from him except effort. No negotiations, no presentations, no strategic discussions. Just work. Honest work. The feeling stayed with him long after he returned home. Days became months. Quietly, without announcements or press releases, Ethan continued showing up. Sometimes at the community center, sometimes at local shelters, sometimes helping small organizations that struggled to find volunteers. He never used his real name. He never informed reporters. The experience changed him in ways he did not fully understand. Meanwhile, Charlotte's life continued moving at its usual pace. Summer arrived. The city grew warmer. The cafe remained busy. Her mother's health improved slightly, bringing cautious optimism back into their apartment. One evening, Charlotte stopped by a neighborhood bookstore after work. As she browsed a shelf near the back, she overheard 2 customers talking. "Did you hear about that anonymous donor?" one asked. "The guy who paid for the community center renovations?" Charlotte glanced up briefly. "Apparently nobody knows who he is," the other replied. "He even refused to have his name on the building." The conversation drifted away. Charlotte returned to her book, yet the story lingered in her thoughts. Anonymous generosity felt increasingly rare. Later that night, she sat beside the apartment window while a soft summer rain rolled across the city. Her mother looked up from a magazine. "You have been thinking a lot lately." Charlotte smiled. "Maybe. About him." Charlotte stared at the rain. "A little." Her mother folded the magazine closed. "People can change." Charlotte nodded slowly. "Sometimes." But she also knew that real change required more than good intentions. It required consistency. Character revealed itself over time. Not during grand speeches. Not beneath ballroom lights. Outside, the rain continued falling across Manhattan. And several miles away, Ethan sat alone in his office after everyone else had gone home. The skyline shimmered beyond the glass windows. A photograph still rested on his desk. He looked at it for a long moment before placing it inside a drawer. For the first time since that unforgettable night, he no longer felt driven by rejection. Instead, he felt driven by a question. What kind of man would he become if nobody was watching? Autumn arrived quietly. Leaves gathered along sidewalks. The air turned cooler. Nearly 7 months had passed since the night that changed everything, and neither Ethan nor Charlotte realized how closely their paths had begun moving around each other again. One Thursday evening, Charlotte finished her shift later than usual. The cafe owner had been reviewing budgets with a worried expression all week. Sales were down. Utility costs were rising. A rent increase was coming in January. Everyone felt it. Nobody said much. As Charlotte wiped down the final table near the window, she overheard part of a conversation between the owner and the accountant. "Without the grant, we might have to reduce hours after Christmas." Charlotte lowered her eyes and continued cleaning. She knew what reduced hours meant. Fewer shifts, less income, more uncertainty. Yet she said nothing. Worry never solved tomorrow's problems. After work, she walked home through cool evening air beneath a sky filled with drifting clouds. Meanwhile, several miles away, Ethan attended a board meeting inside his company headquarters. The discussion centered around expansion plans. New acquisitions, new offices, new revenue targets. The executives around the table seemed energized. Yet Ethan found himself strangely disconnected from the conversation. 8 months earlier, he would have dominated every detail. Tonight, his attention drifted toward a different report resting beside him. A small community development proposal, independent cafes, family-owned businesses, neighborhood organizations, places that rarely appeared in billion-dollar conversations. After the meeting ended, Ethan remained alone in the conference room. He reviewed the proposal again, then quietly approved funding through a foundation program that would distribute support anonymously to dozens of struggling local businesses. No press release, no interviews, no public announcement, just signatures on paper. He never imagined one of those businesses would be the cafe where Charlotte worked. 3 weeks later, an envelope arrived at the cafe. The owner opened it near the register. His hands shook. Employees gathered around. Charlotte watched from a distance. Then the owner looked up with tears in his eyes. "We got it," he whispered. "We actually got it." The grant would cover renovations, equipment upgrades, and operating costs for nearly 2 years. Relief swept through the room like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Staff members hugged one another. Customers applauded when they heard the news. Charlotte smiled with everyone else. Yet one detail caught her attention. The donor's name was not listed. Anonymous. The same word she had heard months earlier regarding the community center. That evening, curiosity finally overcame her. At home, she searched through public records connected to the foundation. The information revealed very little. Most people would have stopped there. Charlotte did not. She followed one document to another, one filing to another. Eventually, a familiar corporate structure appeared beneath layers of paperwork. Her eyes widened slightly. Ethan Crawford. She leaned back slowly in her chair. The room fell silent except for the ticking of an old clock on the wall. He had never contacted her, never mentioned the grant, never taken credit. For several long minutes, Charlotte simply stared at the screen. Then she closed the laptop. Outside, wind moved through the trees below her apartment window. Somewhere across the city, Ethan finished another volunteer shift without knowing she had discovered the truth. And for the first time since the gala, Charlotte found herself wondering not whether he had changed, but how much. Winter arrived with little warning. The first snow of the season dusted rooftops across Manhattan and transformed the city into something quieter. Charlotte stood near the cafe window one evening, watching white flakes drift beneath streetlights. Business had improved since the grant arrived. New equipment hummed behind the counter. Fresh paint brightened the walls. Employees no longer whispered about layoffs. Relief had settled into the building like warmth from a fireplace. Yet another thought had taken its place. Ethan, not the billionaire from magazine covers. Not the man standing beneath crystal chandeliers holding a velvet box. The man who had chosen to help without taking credit. The man who seemed determined to disappear behind good deeds. Weeks passed. Charlotte never contacted him. She simply watched from a distance whenever his name appeared in the news. Gradually, she noticed something changing. Articles focused less on acquisitions and more on company culture. Interviews sounded different. The language felt different. Less about winning, more about responsibility. Then January arrived, along with a problem no amount of positive headlines could hide. It began with a financial report leaked to the press. Analysts discovered serious mistakes connected to a major expansion project approved years earlier. Investors panicked. News networks filled entire segments discussing the controversy. Share prices dropped. Commentators predicted disaster. Inside company headquarters, tension spread through every department. Ethan sat at the head of a conference table surrounded by attorneys, executives, and advisors. They all offered variations of the same solution. Distance yourself. Shift responsibility. Blame former leadership teams. Protect the company image. Protect your reputation. Protect shareholder confidence. The strategy made business sense. It was also the strategy Ethan would have chosen a year ago. Silence filled the room. Dozens of eyes waited for his decision. Ethan looked through the glass walls toward the gray winter skyline. Then he thought about crowded subway platforms, volunteer shifts, neighborhood businesses, community centers, and a waitress who once told him he did not know her. Finally, he spoke. "The responsibility is mine." Several executives exchanged nervous glances. One attorney leaned forward immediately. "That would expose you to enormous criticism." Ethan nodded. "I know. You were not personally responsible for every decision. I was responsible for the culture that allowed those decisions." The room fell silent. For the next hour, advisors argued. Numbers were discussed. Risks were calculated. Ethan listened carefully. Then he made the same choice again. Publicly, the announcement stunned financial media. Rather than deflect blame, he accepted accountability. Rather than protect himself, he protected the truth. The market reacted exactly as experts predicted. The company lost billions in valuation within days. Headlines called the decision reckless. Some investors called it irresponsible. Yet something unexpected happened. Employees began speaking openly about their respect for him. Customers expressed support. Community leaders praised the honesty. Trust, once damaged, slowly began rebuilding. Across the city, Charlotte read every article. She noticed what others missed. The old Ethan would have fought to preserve his image. The new Ethan seemed willing to sacrifice it. One snowy evening, she folded the final newspaper and stared quietly through the apartment window. Her mother looked up from the couch. "You are smiling." Charlotte had not realized she was. Outside, snow continued falling across Manhattan. And for the first time since that unforgettable night, she no longer wondered whether Ethan Crawford had changed. She wondered whether she had underestimated him. By early spring, nearly a full year had passed since the gala. The city looked different now. Trees along the sidewalks carried fresh green leaves. Outdoor tables returned to cafes. People lingered a little longer beneath the afternoon sun. Life moved forward, as it always did. Charlotte noticed the date by accident. She was organizing receipts behind the counter when she glanced at the calendar hanging near the kitchen door. Exactly 1 year. For a moment, she simply stared at the number. Then she smiled to herself and returned to work. Across Manhattan, Ethan noticed the same date for a very different reason. He had remembered it for weeks. Not because he planned some grand gesture. Those instincts had faded long ago. Instead, he found himself reflecting on how much had changed. The year had cost him more than he expected. Time, pride, certainty. Yet it had given him something far more valuable. Perspective. That afternoon, Ethan left his office earlier than usual. No assistants accompanied him. No security detail followed behind. He carried only a simple envelope tucked inside his coat pocket. The paper had become slightly worn at the edges after being rewritten several times. Every version before the final one had sounded wrong. Too polished. Too careful. Too much like the man he used to be. By 5 o'clock, he stood outside the cafe. Through the front window, he could see customers finishing late lunches. The familiar warmth of the place spilled onto the sidewalk each time the door opened. He hesitated, then smiled at the irony. A billionaire who could address thousands of shareholders without hesitation suddenly felt nervous walking into a neighborhood cafe. Inside, Charlotte was helping an elderly customer carry 2 bags of pastries toward the door. When she turned back toward the counter, she froze. Ethan stood quietly near the entrance. No expensive suit. No photographers. No audience. Just Ethan. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Charlotte walked toward him. "Hello, Ethan." Her voice was calm, warmer than he remembered. "Hello, Charlotte." The sounds of the cafe continued around them. Coffee machines hissed. Dishes clinked. Conversations drifted through the room. Ordinary life carried on. Ethan reached into his coat and removed the envelope. "I wanted to give you something." Charlotte accepted it carefully. "What is it?" Ethan smiled slightly. "A letter." She looked surprised. "A letter? I figured I had already tried everything else." A quiet laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Ethan noticed and felt his shoulders relax. For the first time in months, neither of them seemed burdened by expectations. Charlotte glanced down at the envelope. Her name appeared across the front in neat handwriting. Nothing else. No company logo. No expensive stationery. Just her name. She looked back up. "Why now?" Ethan considered the question for a moment. Then he answered honestly. "Because a year ago, I wanted you to see me differently." His gaze remained steady. "Now I just want you to know the truth." Charlotte studied him carefully. The confidence remained, but it felt quieter now. Less like armor. More like peace. She slipped the envelope into her apron pocket. Outside, sunlight reflected against the windows. Inside, neither of them realized that the most important moment was not the letter itself. It was the fact that Ethan seemed completely prepared for the possibility that she might never open it. Charlotte did not open the letter that day, or the next. The envelope remained tucked inside a drawer beside her bed while life continued around her. Customers came and went. Bills arrived. Her mother continued getting stronger. Yet every evening, when the apartment grew quiet, Charlotte found herself looking toward that drawer. Not because she was uncertain about Ethan, because she wanted to understand her own feelings first. A week later, on a calm Sunday afternoon, she finally opened it. The letter was shorter than she expected. There were no dramatic declarations, no promises, no attempts to impress her. Ethan had written only a few pages in careful handwriting. He thanked her, not for accepting him, not for believing in him, for challenging him. He admitted that a year earlier, he had mistaken attention for connection and admiration for understanding. He wrote about mistakes he had made, assumptions he had carried, lessons he had learned. Near the end, one sentence made Charlotte stop reading. "You were right about me. I simply needed time to become someone better than the man you met that night." She lowered the letter slowly. Outside her window, sunlight moved across the buildings. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she smiled. Not because Ethan had changed, because he no longer seemed interested in proving it. 3 days later, Charlotte finished her shift and stepped outside the cafe. The spring air felt warm. People filled the sidewalks. Somewhere nearby, a street musician played a soft melody on a piano. As she turned the corner, she saw a familiar figure sitting alone at a small outdoor table across the street. Ethan looked up from a cup of coffee and immediately stood. There was no surprise on his face, almost as if he had not been waiting for her. Almost. Charlotte crossed the street slowly. Ethan smiled. "Hello, Charlotte." "Hello, Ethan." For a moment, they simply stood there. No cameras, no audience, no grand stage. Just two people beneath an ordinary afternoon sky. Charlotte reached into her bag and placed the folded letter on the table. Ethan glanced at it, but said nothing. "I read it," she said. "I figured you might. You never asked me to respond." Ethan nodded. It was not written for a response. The answer lingered between them. Honest, uncomplicated, different from the man she remembered. Charlotte looked toward the empty chair across from him, then back at Ethan. "Are you busy?" A hint of amusement appeared in his eyes. "For the next hour? Maybe longer." Ethan laughed softly. The sound carried no victory, only gratitude. Charlotte sat down. The waiter approached and asked if she wanted anything. She glanced at Ethan's coffee, then ordered one for herself. The two cups rested side by side on the table. Nothing extraordinary. Just coffee. Just conversation. Just a beginning. As the afternoon sunlight stretched across the city, neither of them spoke about the gala, or the rejection, or the year that followed. They talked about books, neighborhoods, family, small things, real things. And somewhere between the first sip and the fading daylight, Charlotte realized she had not given Ethan a chance because he was a billionaire. She had given him a chance because he finally understood that being worthy of respect mattered more than being worthy of attention. And sometimes the most powerful transformation is not becoming someone new. It is becoming someone honest enough to see who you were all along.